My name is Samantha Wilson, and I'm 34 years old. After escaping my abusive parents at 18, I built a successful life and earned my dream apartment in Boston. I worked hard for everything I have, but last year, after 16 years of no contact, my estranged parents showed up at my door with unimaginable demands that would change our lives forever. They wanted my home and monthly payments. Before I tell you how this nightmare turned deadly, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to cut toxic people from your life. I grew up in a small town outside Chicago. The early years of my childhood seemed normal enough. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom house with a small backyard where my dad would push me on a tire swing. Mom would bake cookies on weekends, and we'd sit together watching cartoons on Saturday mornings. But everything changed when I turned 8. Dad lost his job at the manufacturing plant. He started drinking to cope with the shame. At first, it was just beer in the evenings, but soon he was reaching for whiskey before noon. Mom grew bitter and resentful, blaming everyone but themselves for their problems. The first time Dad yelled at me until I cried was over spilled milk at dinner. Literally, spilled milk. I remember Mom just sitting there staring at her plate as if nothing was happening. When Dad stormed out, she looked at me and said, "You need to be more careful. You know how he gets." By the time I was 10, the emotional abuse had escalated to physical. Dad would grab my arm so hard, it left bruises if I answered a question with attitude. Mom would tell me I was being dramatic if I cried. "Some kids get beaten with belts," she'd say. "You should be grateful." Dad's alcoholism made him unpredictable. Some days he'd come home and lock himself in the bedroom. Other days, he'd rage through the house looking for things to be angry about. A dish in the sink. A light left on. Homework on the table. Mom and I learned to exist in a state of constant vigilance, reading his moods, anticipating his anger. When I was 12, a school counselor noticed the bruises on my wrists. She called me into her office and asked gentle questions. I told her I fell off my bike. When she called my parents in for a meeting, Mom crafted a perfect performance of concern. Dad stayed sober for the meeting and played the role of the caring father. "We had no idea she was so clumsy," Mom told the counselor with a laugh. "We'll make sure she wears protective gear when she rides her bike from now on." The counselor seemed doubtful, but had no proof. When we got home, Mom slapped me hard across the face. "Don't you ever embarrass us like that again," she hissed. The only bright spot in my childhood was my friendship with Mia, who lived next door. Her family was warm and loud in all the ways mine wasn't. Her parents argued sometimes, but they also laughed and hugged and said, "I love you," without reservation. Mia's home became my sanctuary. I'd make excuses to stay there as long as possible, soaking in the normalcy. I learned to become invisible at home. I studied my parents' patterns and adapted. I kept my grades high because poor performance triggered Dad's rage. I cleaned the house before Mom got home to avoid her cutting remarks. I developed the ability to sense shifts in mood to anticipate danger before it arrived. These survival skills came at a cost. I never learned how to just be a kid. The breaking point came when I was 16. Dad had lost another job and had been drinking heavily for days. I was washing dishes when he came into the kitchen demanding dinner. I told him Mom had left food in the fridge. He didn't want leftovers. The argument escalated until he grabbed my arm and twisted. The snap was audible. The pain was blinding. At the hospital, Mom told the doctor I fell down the stairs. When the doctor stepped out, she leaned close to my ear. "If you say anything different, they'll take you away and put you in foster care. Is that what you want? To be with strangers who might do worse?" I stayed silent, but in that moment, I made a decision. I would leave on my 18th birthday. I began planning my escape, saving every dollar I could from babysitting jobs researching scholarships and keeping my grades perfect. Mia was the only one who knew. For the next 2 years, I became the perfect daughter on the surface while preparing for freedom underneath. Every time Dad's hand left a mark, every time Mom's words cut deep, I reminded myself, this is temporary. I will survive this, and I will never come back. My 18th birthday fell on a Tuesday. I'd arranged with Mia to stay with her family temporarily. I'd received a small scholarship to community college and had saved almost $3,000 from various under-the-table jobs. I waited until after the awkward birthday dinner where Mom had made my favorite cake, which was actually her favorite. Dad had managed to stay relatively sober and even gave me a $20 bill as a gift. That night, I packed my essential belongings into a duffel bag and backpack. As I was about to leave, Dad stumbled into my room, drunk again, now that the birthday performance was over. "Where do you think you're going?" He slurred, blocking the doorway. "I'm 18 now," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I'm leaving." His face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little bitch! After everything we've done for you!" Mom appeared behind him. "Samantha, don't be ridiculous. You have nowhere to go. No one will ever care about you like we do." "Care about me?" I laughed, years of pain bubbling to the surface. "You've never cared about me. You've only cared about controlling me." Dad lunged forward, but I was expecting it. I dodged his grasp and pushed past them both. Mom grabbed at my backpack. "I'm sick!" she cried. "Who will take care of me if you leave? I might not make it without you here." It was her favorite manipulation tactic, the mysterious illness that only flared up when she needed something. I kept walking. "You leave now, don't ever come back," Dad shouted after me. "You're dead to us." I met Mia at the end of the street at midnight. She hugged me tightly as I sobbed with relief and fear. I was free, but I was also alone. The first year was harder than I'd imagined. I stayed with Mia's family for 2 months before I felt I was imposing too much. Then came a rotation of friends' couches, a youth shelter for a few weeks, and finally a room in a shared apartment with 3 other girls. I worked as a barista in the mornings, a restaurant hostess in the evenings, and took classes at the community college in between. Everything changed when I applied for a special scholarship program during my 2nd semester. It provided more financial support and paired recipients with mentors. That's how I met Dr. Kimberly Jackson, a marketing professor who saw something in me that I couldn't yet see in myself. "You have incredible resilience," she told me after reading my scholarship essay about overcoming challenges. "But you also have talent. Your analytical skills are exceptional." With Dr. Jackson's guidance, I secured better financial aid and a part-time job at the campus library that allowed me to focus more on my studies. I declared a business major with a focus on marketing, discovering I had a knack for understanding consumer psychology. Graduation day was surreal. I had no family in the audience, but Mia and her parents drove 3 hours to be there, Dr. Jackson took photos of me in my cap and gown and treated me to dinner afterward. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "But this is just the beginning." My first job was an entry-level position at a small marketing firm. The pay was modest, but it was enough to rent a tiny studio apartment of my own. No roommates, no couch surfing. My own space that was safe and private. Around the same time, I started therapy with Dr. Rachel Thompson. The stability of having my own place and regular income allowed me to finally address the trauma I'd been outrunning. "You've been in survival mode for so long," Dr. Thompson observed during our sessions. "Now it's time to learn how to thrive." The healing wasn't linear. There were panic attacks and nightmares triggers I didn't know existed until I encountered them. But there was also growth. I learned to recognize the hypervigilance that had kept me safe as a child, but now hindered my adult relationships. I learned to set boundaries. I learned that the voice in my head that sounded like my mother was not the truth. Over the years, my career progressed steadily. I moved from the small firm to a larger agency then, to an in-house marketing role at a tech company. By 30, I was a marketing director with a team under my leadership. At 32, I purchased my dream apartment in Boston, a one-bedroom, in a renovated historical building with high ceilings and enormous windows that flooded the space with light. It was more than just a home. It was tangible proof of how far I'd come. I also built a chosen family along the way, close friends who understood boundaries and respect. Mia remained my sister in all but blood even after she moved to Seattle for work. We visited each other twice a year without fail. Dating was complicated with my background. I had trust issues that sabotaged several promising relationships. But at 33, I met James, a software engineer, who lived in my building. He was patient with my walls and consistent in his kindness. For the first time, I felt safe enough to be vulnerable with someone. After 16 years, I had created a life my younger self couldn't have imagined. I was safe. I was successful. I was loved. I thought I had outrun my past. I was wrong. It was a Friday evening in April. I was curled up on my couch with a glass of wine and the latest psychological thriller novel when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I assumed it might be James, who sometimes stopped by spontaneously with takeout. When I opened the door, the wine glass nearly slipped from my fingers. Standing in my hallway were two people I hadn't seen in 16 years, yet would recognize anywhere. My parents. They had aged dramatically. Dad's once imposing frame had shrunk his face gaunt, with deep lines around his bloodshot eyes. His hair had gone completely gray. Mom looked brittle, her skin hanging loosely on her thin frame, her dyed blonde hair showing dark roots. For a moment, we all just stared at each other. I felt like I was 8 years old again, frozen in fear. "Aren't you going to invite us in?" Dad finally asked, his voice raspier than I remembered, but with the same underlying hostility. "How did you find me?" I managed to ask, my hand gripping the door so tightly my knuckles turned white. "A mother always finds her child," Mom said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We've been looking for you for so long, Samantha." I knew that was a lie. If they'd wanted to find me before now, they could have. I'd made no effort to hide. My name and photo were on my company's website. I was on LinkedIn. I'd given interviews for industry publications. "What do you want?" I asked, not moving from the doorway. "We just want to talk," Mom said, her eyes darting past me to scan my apartment. "It's been so long." Dad took a step forward. "Are you going to make a scene in front of your neighbors?" "Let us in, Samantha." I glanced down the hallway, noticing my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, peering curiously from her partially open door. The last thing I wanted was a public confrontation. Reluctantly, I stepped aside. They entered my apartment, slowly taking in every detail. I saw Dad's eyes linger on my expensive sound system. Mom ran her finger along my marble kitchen countertop. "Nice place you've got," Dad said. "Must have cost a fortune." "What do you want?" I repeated, leaving the front door open. A clear message this visit would be brief. Mom settled onto my couch uninvited. "Can't parents want to reconnect with their only daughter? We've missed you, Sammy." I flinched at the childhood nickname. "It's been 16 years. Why now?" Dad wandered to my window, looking out at the view of the Boston skyline. "We've had some tough times. Thought family should stick together." Family. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "You told me I was dead to you the night I left." "People say things they don't mean when they're upset," Mom said dismissively. "We're still your parents." As the initial shock wore off, I began noticing things, the desperation beneath their forced casualness. The way Dad kept assessing everything in my apartment as if calculating its value. Mom's envious glances at my clothes, my furniture. "How did you know I live here?" I asked again. Mom shifted uncomfortably. "We saw your promotion announcement in Business Weekly. Your company profile mentioned Boston, so we did some searching online. Found your social media." My profiles were private, but my workplace was public information. Still, the idea that they'd been monitoring me made my skin crawl. "We've had a bit of bad luck," Dad finally said, cutting to the chase. "Lost the house." "Dad's investments didn't pan out," Mom added quickly. "Investments?" I raised an eyebrow. "The casino isn't an investment, Diana," Dad snapped at her before turning back to me. "Look, we need a place to stay for a while. This apartment has plenty of room." I stared at him in disbelief. "You can't stay here." "Why not? You've got all this space, all this money." He gestured around. "Meanwhile, your mother and I are practically homeless." "That's not my problem," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Mom's face hardened. "We raised you, fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head for 18 years. You owe us." I nearly laughed. "You think what you did counts as raising me, the abuse, the gaslighting, breaking my arm, and then lying about it?" "Don't be so dramatic," Mom said. "All parents discipline their children." "We're not just asking for charity," Dad cut in. "We've looked into it. There are laws about children supporting their parents. Filial responsibility, they call it. We could sue you for support payments." My blood ran cold. I had heard of such laws, though I didn't know if they applied in our case. The threat alone was enough to shake me. "This apartment would be perfect for us," Mom said, looking around. "You could get something smaller, and a monthly allowance would help us get back on our feet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they'd put me through, after 16 years of silence, they'd tracked me down, not to apologize, not to make amends, but to take what I had built. "I think you should leave," I said, pointing to the still open door. Dad's face darkened in that familiar way that had always preceded violence in my childhood. "You ungrateful little—" "I'll call security if you don't leave now," I said, reaching for my phone. Dad lunged forward and grabbed my wrist, twisting hard just like he used to. "You think you're better than us now with your fancy job and fancy apartment? You're nothing without us. Nothing." The years fell away, and I was a terrified child again, trapped in his grip. Dad's fingers dug into my wrist as he pulled me closer to his face. His breath reeked of alcohol, just like it had all those years ago. Some things never changed. "Let go of me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mom moved to block the open door. "Harold, calm down. This isn't how we planned this." Planned. The word echoed in my head. This wasn't a spontaneous visit. They had calculated this, strategized how to best manipulate or intimidate me. Dad's grip tightened, and suddenly I was 16 again, feeling my arms snap under his strength. The flashback was so vivid, I could hear the crack, feel the searing pain. My breath quickened as panic threatened to overwhelm me. "I'm calling my neighbor," I managed to say, using my free hand to press the speed dial for James. Dad tried to grab my phone, but I pulled back. "James," I said when he answered, my voice deliberately loud. "My parents are here. Can you come over right away? It's an emergency." Dad released my wrist and backed up, slightly wary now that someone else was involved, but his rage hadn't subsided. He turned and grabbed a framed photo from my bookshelf, a picture of me with Dr. Jackson at my college graduation. "Who's this, your replacement mother?" he sneered before throwing the frame to the floor. The glass shattered. Mom had begun opening my kitchen cabinets, pulling open drawers. You have so many nice things, Samantha. More than you need. Stop going through my stuff, I demanded. Get out of my home. While I was focused on Mom, Dad had moved to my home office area. He yanked open my desk drawer and found the emergency cash I kept there, about $500. Well, look at this, he said, pocketing the money. Consider it back payment for all those years we supported you. Put that back, I said, moving toward him. Mom had found my personal files, flipping through bank statements with widening eyes. You make this much money, and you won't help your own parents. Those are private, I said, snatching the papers from her hands. You need to leave. Now. Or what? Dad challenged, moving closer again. You'll throw us out, your own flesh and blood. Yes, I said firmly. Get out of my apartment before my neighbor gets here, or I'll call the police. Something snapped in Dad's eyes. It was a look I remembered all too well from childhood, the moment when his control completely disappeared. You think you're too good for us now, he roared, lunging at me. I stepped back instinctively, but he caught my shoulders and shoved me hard against the wall. The back of my head hit with a thud that made my vision blur momentarily. Harold? Mom gasped, but she made no move to stop him. Years of therapy had taught me that I deserved to be safe, that I had the right to defend myself. As Dad pulled back his arm to strike me, I brought my knee up hard, connecting with his stomach. He doubled over, gasping. I pushed past him toward the door, but he recovered quickly, grabbing my ankle and causing me to stumble. I fell forward, catching myself on the edge of my coffee table. Dad was on his feet again, rage contorting his features into something barely human. You little bitch! He spat, charging toward me. I scrambled to my feet, but he was already upon me. His hands reached for my throat. I twisted away, but his momentum carried us both forward. We crashed into the glass coffee table. There was a sickening sound of shattering glass, followed by Dad's strangled gasp. When I managed to disentangle myself from him, I saw the horrifying sight. A large shard of glass had penetrated Dad's neck. Blood pulsed from the wound, spreading rapidly across my cream-colored rug. Harold! Mom screamed, finally moving from her spot by the door. What have you done? She shrieked at me. I stood frozen in shock. It was an accident. He attacked me. Dad was making terrible gurgling sounds, his eyes wide with panic. Blood continued to pour from his neck despite Mom's frantic attempts to stop the bleeding with her hands. Call 911! I shouted to Mom, who was now sobbing hysterically over Dad's body. Instead of reaching for a phone, she turned to me with hatred in her eyes. You killed him. You killed your father. The commotion had attracted attention. My neighbors were now in the hallway, looking in through the still open door with horror. Someone was already on the phone with emergency services. I knelt beside Dad, trying to apply pressure to the wound, but the glass was still embedded in his neck. I'd taken a first aid course through work, but nothing had prepared me for this. His eyes were fixed on mine, filled with confusion and fading anger. His lips moved, but no words came out, only more blood. By the time the paramedics arrived minutes later, Dad had stopped moving. They worked on him frantically, but their expressions told me what I already knew. He was gone. The police arrived with the ambulance. They separated Mom and me, questioning us in different areas of my apartment. Mom was hysterical, pointing at me, screaming that I had murdered her husband in cold blood. He came at me, I explained numbly to the female officer taking my statement. We fell into the table. It was self-defense. But when they handcuffed me and read me my rights, I realized with sinking dread that Mom's version of events was the one they were believing. As they led me past my neighbors in the hallway, I saw James pushing through the crowd, his face pale with shock. Call Kimberly Jackson, I managed to tell him before they put me in the police car. Her number is in my phone. As the car pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of my building. In the space of an hour, everything I had built over 16 years had come crashing down around me. The holding cell was cold and smelled of disinfectant and despair. I sat on the hard bench, still wearing my blood-stained clothes, trying to process what had happened. My father was dead. I had been arrested. My mother had called me a murderer. I spent the night in that cell, alternating between shock, grief, and terror. By morning, I was assigned a public defender, Anthony Rodriguez, a tired-looking man with kind eyes and a rumpled suit. "Ms. Wilson," he said as we sat in a small interview room, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened." I took a deep breath and told him everything. The childhood abuse, the escape at 18, the 16 years of no contact, the unexpected visit and their demands for my apartment and money, the escalation to violence when I refused. "He was going to hurt me," I said, "just like he used to. We fell into the table during the struggle. The glass. It was an accident." Rodriguez took detailed notes. "Do you have any documentation of the past abuse hospital records, police reports?" "The broken arm when I was 16, I said. "But my mother told the hospital I fell downstairs. There won't be any record of abuse." "Any witnesses to the childhood abuse?" "Anyone who might corroborate your history." "My friend Mia, she lived next door growing up, and my therapist, Dr. Thompson. I've been seeing her for years to deal with the trauma." Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "What about the incident itself? Any witnesses?" "My neighbors might have heard something, and I called my neighbor James right before it happened." He made a note. "That's good. That supports the timeline of escalation." Later that day, I was interviewed by Detective Jennifer Marshall, a stern-faced woman who seemed skeptical of my self-defense claim. "Your mother tells a different story," she informed me. "She says you invited them over, got into an argument about money, and pushed your father into the table in a fit of rage." "That's not true," I said, feeling ill. "They showed up unannounced. They were demanding my apartment and threatening to sue me for support." Marshall raised an eyebrow. "Support from a child to parents, that's unusual." "They called it filial responsibility, said there were laws about it." "And this made you angry enough to kill your father." "I didn't kill him," I protested. "He attacked me. I defended myself. We fell into the table together. It was an accident." The detective studied me for a long moment. "We'll be checking your story, Ms. Wilson. If there are security cameras in your building, if your neighbors heard anything, we'll find out." My bail hearing was the next day. To my surprise, Dr. Jackson was there along with James. They had posted my bail, allowing me to leave custody while awaiting trial. I learned that Mom had been staying with a distant relative in the area. The investigation began to uncover the truth. The building's hallway security camera had captured my parents' aggressive entry into my apartment and Mom's move to block the door from the inside. Neighbors reported hearing a man shouting threats. James confirmed receiving my panicked call. Most damning for Mom's version of events were the discoveries about my parents' recent past. Dad had lost their house due to gambling debts, not investment failures. They had been evicted 3 months earlier. There were multiple recent arrests for Dad for drunk and disorderly conduct. And most revealing browser history on their shared tablet showed searches for children's obligation to support parents, how to sue child for alimony, and how to claim child's property. The biggest surprise came when the police uncovered several domestic violence reports Mom had filed against Dad over the years, then later withdrawn. These reports, which I had never known about, ironically supported my claims of Dad's violent tendencies. Mia flew in from Seattle to provide a statement about witnessing my childhood abuse. Dr. Thompson offered expert testimony about my PTSD and how it was consistent with severe childhood trauma. 2 weeks after the incident, the district attorney reduced the charges significantly based on the mounting evidence supporting self-defense. Mom, meanwhile, was arrested for perjury after her statement contradicted the security footage and other evidence. During this period, my case attracted media attention. "Successful executive kills abusive father in self-defense," read one headline. Parents attempt to extort estranged daughter end in tragedy, read another. My privacy was shattered, my trauma exposed for public consumption. The trial lasted 5 days. I took the stand and told my story, reliving both the childhood abuse and the fatal confrontation. Mom also testified, but her story had changed now that she faced her own legal troubles. She claimed Dad had forced her to go along with the plan, that she had been afraid to contradict him. When the jury returned after deliberation, I held my breath. "Not guilty," the foreman announced. "The jury finds the defendant acted in self-defense." Relief flooded through me, but there was no joy. A man was dead. My father was dead. And while I hadn't intended to kill him, his blood was still on my hands. Mom eventually pleaded guilty to perjury and conspiracy to commit extortion. She received a 5-year sentence. As they led her from the courtroom, she looked at me with empty eyes. I saw no remorse, no understanding, only the same self-pity that had defined her throughout my childhood. I walked out of that courthouse legally exonerated, but emotionally devastated. The nightmare was far from over. I couldn't bear to return to my apartment. The place I had once seen as my sanctuary was now tainted with blood and trauma. James offered his guest room until I could figure out my next steps. I accepted gratefully, still numb from everything that had happened. The first night in James's apartment, I woke up screaming, trapped in a nightmare where Dad's blood kept rising, flooding the room, drowning me. James appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face, but careful not to enter without permission. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. I nodded, wiping tears from my face. "You're safe," he said, sitting at the edge of the bed. "You're not there anymore." But in my mind, I was still there. Still trapped in that moment when everything changed, when Dad's life drained away before my eyes. The legal system had declared me innocent, but I couldn't shake the guilt. "I killed my father," I whispered in the darkness. "No," James said firmly. "He died because of his own actions. You defended yourself." I took a leave of absence from work. My company was surprisingly supportive, especially after the media coverage clarified the circumstances. Still, I knew there were whispers, speculation, judgment. The woman who killed her father. The broken family reunion that ended in death. Dr. Thompson increased our sessions to twice weekly. "What you're experiencing is complicated grief," she explained, "mixed with trauma and PTSD. You're mourning not just your father's death, but the father you never had, the childhood that was stolen from you." The guilt persisted despite her reassurances. "If I hadn't let them in, they would have found another way," she said gently. "From everything you've told me, and from the evidence presented in court, they came with a plan. They were determined to take what you had built." My PTSD symptoms, which I'd managed to control through years of therapy, came roaring back with new intensity. Loud noises made me jump. Crowded spaces triggered panic attacks. Sleep became a battleground of nightmares. But I wasn't alone this time. James stayed steady, never pushing, always respectful of my boundaries. Dr. Jackson checked in regularly. Mia called every day until I convinced her to return to her life in Seattle. Then there were the unexpected sources of support. An online forum for survivors of family abuse reached out after seeing my story in the news. Suddenly, I was connected to people who understood my experience in ways even my closest friends couldn't. "My parents never tried to take my home," wrote one woman, "but they emptied my bank account when I was hospitalized. Family isn't always blood." "I haven't spoken to my mother in 20 years, shared another. Some people will never understand that no contact is sometimes the only healthy choice. Reading their stories, I began to feel less alone, less like a monster for having defended myself, for having cut ties with toxic parents. Gradually, I started a private blog sharing my healing journey anonymously. The response was overwhelming. So many others carried similar wounds hidden beneath the surface of seemingly normal lives. After 2 months, I felt ready to return to work, starting with part-time hours. My team welcomed me back without awkwardness, a testament to the relationships I'd built over the years. The normalcy of spreadsheets and marketing campaigns was comforting in its banality. I found a new apartment in a different neighborhood. Something smaller, cozier, with no memories attached. James helped me move along with several colleagues who had become friends. My old apartment sold quickly despite my fear that the tragedy would make it unmarketable. Each small step felt like a victory. The first night I slept through without nightmares. The first time I laughed without immediately feeling guilty. The first day I went without thinking about what had happened. James and I grew closer through the crisis. He had seen me at my most vulnerable and hadn't run away. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my new apartment sharing a bottle of wine, he took my hand. "I've been afraid to say this," he admitted. "I didn't want to add any pressure while you're healing. But I love you, Samantha. I've loved you since before all this happened, and nothing has changed that." I looked at him, this man who had stood by me through the darkest period of my adult life. "I love you too," I said, surprised by how easily the words came. "But I'm still broken." He shook his head. "You're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference." For the first time since that fateful night, I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps my life wasn't over. That perhaps I could find joy again despite everything that had happened. 2 years have passed since the night my father died in my apartment. I'm still in Boston, but in a different neighborhood, in a home that holds only good memories. I returned to my marketing career and was even promoted last year to VP of Marketing. The transition wasn't easy. There were setbacks along the way, days when grief and guilt threatened to pull me under. But each time, I found my way back to the surface stronger for having survived the darkness once again. James proposed 6 months ago. We're planning a small ceremony with only our closest friends, the family we've chosen for ourselves. His parents, who welcomed me with open arms, despite knowing my complicated history, will be there. Mia will be my maid of honor. My understanding of family has fundamentally changed. For years, I believed family was something you were born into, a bond defined by blood. Now I know that true family is built on respect, love, and mutual support. The people who stand by you at your lowest moments, who celebrate your victories without envy, who see your scars and love you not despite them, but because they are part of your story. Mom remains in prison. She sends letters occasionally full of self-pity and thinly veiled manipulation. Her latest letter included a request for forgiveness. I haven't decided yet whether to respond. Dr. Thompson says forgiveness is a personal journey, not an obligation. Forgiveness doesn't mean what she did was okay, she explained during one of our now monthly sessions. It means freeing yourself from the burden of anger. I'm working on that forgiveness not for Mom's sake, but for my own. The anger I carried for so many years has gradually given way to something like pity. I see now that my parents were trapped in their own cycles of dysfunction, unable or unwilling to break free. The tragedy also sparked an unexpected calling. I started a foundation to help young adults escape abusive homes, providing resources I wished I'd had at 18. Legal advice, temporary housing, educational opportunities. We've helped over 100 young people so far. I've spoken at conferences about family abuse, trauma, and recovery. I've met with legislators about improving filial responsibility laws to prevent them from being weaponized by abusive parents. I've published a memoir about my experience, hoping to reach others who might feel alone in their struggle. Through this work, I've learned that breaking generational trauma isn't just about escaping. It's about rebuilding, about creating a different kind of life based on healthier principles. It's about understanding that while we can't change our past, we can determine our future. I still sometimes wake up in the night, heart pounding from nightmares, where I'm trapped in that apartment with Dad's blood spreading across the floor. But now James is there, his steady presence a reminder that I'm safe, that the nightmare is over. The most profound lesson I've learned through all of this is that we deserve protection, even from those who are supposed to love us. That self-defense isn't just physical, but emotional. That sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away from toxic relationships, even when society tells us that blood ties should be unbreakable. I've come to peace with what happened that night. I didn't want my father to die. I only wanted to be safe. In the chaos of that moment, tragedy occurred. I can acknowledge that truth without shouldering all the blame. The circumstances that led to his death began long before that night, in years of abuse and the final desperate plan to take what I had built. I'm creating the life and family I always deserved now. A life built on mutual respect and genuine care. A family chosen deliberately rather than inherited by chance. If you're watching this and struggling with your own family trauma, know that you're not alone. Your story matters. Your safety matters. You deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of blood ties. Family should be a source of support, not fear. And sometimes, creating boundaries, even permanent ones, is the healthiest choice you can make. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. How do you define family in your life? Is it about blood connections, or have you created your own chosen family? Click the like button if my story resonated with you. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories of survival and healing, and share this video if you think it might help someone else struggling with similar issues. Thank you for listening, and remember, you deserve to be safe, loved, and respected no matter what anyone else tells you.